picture this scenario for a second. You have spent your entire career on the streets, right?
Yeah.
Like, you worked your way up from being a beat cop in Kansas City, you joined the FBI, and eventually, after all of that, you find yourself walking into this extremely intimidating boardroom.
Right. Definitely a change of scenery.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And waiting for you in this room are two of Harvard Law School's most elite, legendary negotiation professors. You sit down, a tape recorder clicks on, and immediately they just hit you with this ultimate pressure test.
They go right for the throat.
Exactly. They look at you and say, "We've got your son. Give us $1 million or he dies."
Which is just, I mean, it is a phenomenal opening gambit. Because they are using their home turf, right?
Yeah.
And this highly visceral, terrifying scenario to just assert absolute dominance right out of the gate.
So the question for you listening right now is, how do you beat the world's leading academic experts when your own kid's life is theoretically on the line?
Right. What's the play?
Well, you don't use some masterful, intricate, highly logical argument. You use a really simple 4-second question that completely, utterly dismantles their approach.
It literally breaks their brains.
It does. So today we're doing a deep dive into Chapter 1, The New Rules, from our source material on extreme negotiation tactics. And you are about to learn why the old school logic-based methods of doing business are they're obsolete.
Completely outdated.
Right, and why mastering the messy, emotional reality of human psychology is actually the ultimate shortcut to becoming the smartest person in any room, whether you're, closing a startup deal or just asking for a raise.
And to truly understand how those new rules operate, we have to look really closely at the mechanics of that encounter in the Harvard boardroom. Because it wasn't just like a clash of personalities. It was a collision of two entirely different paradigms of human behavior.
So let's break down that collision. Our FBI agent, Chris Voss, is at Harvard taking this executive negotiating course, and he's already feeling totally out of his depth.
Oh, yeah, imposter syndrome for sure.
Exactly. He's rubbing shoulders with Ivy League titans, CEOs, these brilliant law students, and then Robert Mnookin, who is the director of the Harvard Negotiation Research Project, invites him to his office.
Just casually.
Right. Voss thinks it's just for coffee, but he walks in, and Mnookin is sitting there with Gabriella Bloom.
And she is no joke.
No, she is an international counterterrorism expert. She spent years negotiating for the Israeli National Security Council. So these are heavyweights.
Absolute titans.
Right. So Mnookin hits play on the recorder and drops the ultimatum. "We've got your son, Voss. Give us $1 million or he dies. I am the kidnapper. What are you going to do?"
See, Mnookin and Bloom, they are anticipating a traditional negotiation dance here.
Like a back and forth.
Exactly. In their academic models, a threat of that magnitude is supposed to trigger a very specific set of defensive responses.
What were they expecting him to do?
Well, they expect Voss to, demand proof of life or maybe make a counteroffer or perhaps even attempt to threaten them back. They really want to trap him in this logical framework where they hold all the leverage.
But Voss doesn't do any of that.
No, he doesn't.
He just takes this long, slow stare. He actually smiles. And he says, "How am I supposed to do that?"
Which is just, it halts the entire interaction in its tracks. Mnookin is suddenly forced to completely abandon his aggressive posture.
Yeah, Mnookin gets super flustered. And then Voss follows it up with, "I'm sorry, Robert, how do I know he's even alive?"
It's brilliant.
Right. He uses the professor's first name. He apologizes. But he just fundamentally refuses to engage with the threat on Mnookin's terms.
And this is the deployment of what the FBI calls a calibrated question.
Okay, break that down for us. What is a calibrated question?
So instead of the agent responding defensively to a threat, the burden of problem solving is unexpectedly shifted right back onto the aggressor. Right. Voss is basically communicating, look, I want to meet your demand, but I physically lack the means or the information to do so. You have to help me figure this out.
So it puts it on them.
Exactly. It creates this really subtle but incredibly powerful constraint on the counterpart.
It buys time, right? Which obviously is critical if you're in a real hostage situation.
Absolutely.
But it also seems like it gives the other side this illusion of control. Mnookin feels like she's still in the driver's seat because he is the one being asked for directions.
Yes, exactly. Every time Mnookin attempts to reassert a threat, Voss just simply asks how he is supposed to facilitate the payment.
That is wild.
And the biological mechanism at work here is cognitive overload.
Wait, Cognitive overload, like brain freeze.
Sort of, yeah.
Huh.
When you are asked a how or what question, your brain physically has to expend energy formulating a process.
Ah.
So it actually suspends the amygdala's aggressive response because the brain is suddenly tasked with solving a puzzle.
That makes so much sense. It really reminds me of, like, conversational judo.
Yes. Great analogy.
You aren't blocking the opponent's forward momentum. You are taking their aggressive energy and redirecting it to throw them off balance.
Precisely.
Let me push back on how this applies outside of hostage scenarios, though.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about normal life.
Sure.
If a client is aggressively demanding this totally unreasonable discount on a service, or, a boss is dropping a massive project on your desk at 4:55 p.m. on a Friday.
The worst.
Right. If I answer their demand with a question, doesn't that risk coming across as, like, insubordinate? If I tell my boss, how am I supposed to do that? I mean, I might just get fired for being combative.
Well, that's the catch. The delivery is the only thing that separates a calibrated question from outright insubordination.
Okay, so it's how you say it.
Exactly. If you use a snarky or defiant or even a panic tone, you will absolutely provoke an angry response.
Right, like, how am I supposed to do that?
Exactly. Don't do that. The psychological shift only happens if the tone is deferential and genuinely seeking guidance. Voss utilized what he refers to as the late-night FM DJ voice.
The late-night FM DJ voice. I love that.
Right. It is a deep, slow, and really reassuring vocal register with a downward inflection.
So dropping the pitch of your voice at the end of the sentence to signal calm control.
Yes, the downward inflection biologically signals safety and certainty to the listener's brain.
Wow.
Yeah, when you ask, how am I supposed to do that? Using that specific, calm vocal tone, it forces the counterpart to transition out of that emotional attack mode and into a collaborative problem-solving mode.
That is fascinating.
And we actually see a perfect illustration of this later in Voss's time at Harvard. He partners up for a mock negotiation with this brilliant student referred to in the text as Andy.
Oh, man, the Andy story is a complete masterclass in this technique.
It really is.
Because Andy comes into this mock negotiation totally armed with a rationally airtight explanation for why his offer is the only logical choice.
He's prepared.
Yeah, he has built this inescapable mathematical trap. And Voss, by his own admission, he doesn't have the grand mathematical frameworks that a guy like Andy has.
Right. Voss isn't an economist.
Exactly. So Voss just sits there and repeatedly answers Andy's complex proposals with variations of, how am I supposed to do that? Or what are we trying to accomplish here?
And Andy would offer this really complex rationale for a price point, and Voss would simply reflect the logistical impossibility back onto Andy.
Using the DJ voice.
Using the DJ voice. And what makes this so fascinating is that Andy, who is just desperate to maintain the intellectual high ground and solve the problem, kept negotiating against his own position.
Wait, he negotiated against himself?
Yes. He kept lowering his demands just to accommodate Voss's calibrated helplessness.
So Voss ends up draining every single dime out of Andy's budget. I mean, Andy even dips into a reserve fund that his professor had explicitly instructed him not to touch under any circumstances.
Which is incredible. And when the professor later asks Andy, why he violated his core instructions, Andy admits he had no idea what was even happening.
He didn't even notice.
No, because the calibrated question doesn't register as a rejection. It feels like an objective logistical hurdle that the counterpart voluntarily chooses to help you overcome.
Wow. So the practical takeaway for you listening is to really practice this restraint. When you are faced with an aggressive demand in business, your instinct will absolutely be to argue back.
It's human nature.
Right. You will want to explain why their demand is unfair. Do not do that. Arguing just entrenches them in their position.
It makes them dig their heels in.
Exactly. Instead, use a calibrated question like, how am I supposed to do that? Delivered with that calm, downward inflecting DJ voice, you force them to negotiate with themselves. You make them bridge the gap between their demand and your reality.
It is remarkably effective. But, it leads us to a much broader historical question.
Which is,
well, how did an FBI agent with essentially experiential street tactics uncover a massive blind spot in the world's most sophisticated academic negotiation theories?
That's a great question. And the answer is pretty dark. It's because the FBI learned the hard way that relying purely on academic theory in life or death situations gets people killed.
Yeah, it's a grim reality. To fully grasp why the FBI had to develop such emotionally driven, deeply psychological tactics, we have to look back at the somewhat bloody evolution of negotiation within law enforcement.
Right, because prior to the 1970s, hostage negotiation wasn't a refined psychological art at all. In fact, it barely even existed as a concept.
It was essentially just brute force.
Yeah. The strategy for law enforcement back then was basically to talk to the hostage takers just long enough to stall, figure out the layout of the building, and get a sniper or a SWAT team in place to take them out.
Right. The communication was entirely just a waiting game for a tactical intervention. There was absolutely no methodology for understanding the hostage taker's worldview, or uncovering their underlying motivations, or trying to systematically de-escalate their emotional state.
And that approach led to a string of highly public disasters.
Mm.
I mean, the whole world watched the tragedy of the 1972 Munich Olympics unfold on television, right? Where a botched rescue attempt by German police left 11 Israeli athletes dead.
Horrific.
But the defining catalyst for the FBI's evolution, the thing that changed everything, occurred on an airport tarmac in Jacksonville, Florida in October 1971.
Yes, the George Gift Jr. incident. This is the case that fundamentally altered American law enforcement protocol forever.
So George Gift Jr. was this unhinged individual who hijacked a chartered plane. He was heavily armed. He was highly volatile. The FBI manages to get the plane to land in Jacksonville to refuel.
Okay.
So they are in a standoff on the tarmac.
Huh.
Initially, the situation is incredibly tense, but two of the hostages actually managed to convince Giffey to let them go.
Oh, wow.
Right, so the tension is slowly, naturally de-escalating on its own. But the FBI agents on the ground get impatient. They are operating under that old paradigm of physical intervention we talked about.
They want to end it tactically.
Exactly. They decide they need to force the issue and prevent the plane from taking off at all costs.
So, without attempting any further dialogue whatsoever to understand Gift's mental state, they escalate the physical confrontation.
They shoot out the engine of the aircraft.
Which is just the ultimate tactical error.
It is.
Yeah.
Gift panics. He murders his estranged wife, who was on the plane with him.
Yeah.
He murders the pilot, and then he kills himself.
It was an absolute catastrophe entirely born from a lack of psychological strategy.
And the fallout from that tarmac in Jacksonville was monumental because it ended up in the federal court system.
Yeah.
The pilot's wife and Gift's daughter actually filed a wrongful death suit against the FBI.
Which was unprecedented.
Yes, and the courts agreed with the families. In the landmark 1975 Downs v. United States decision, the court declared the FBI was negligent. The language of the ruling was incredibly damning. They explicitly stated that the FBI turned a successful waiting game into a shooting match.
So the court legally mandated that law enforcement had to attempt reasonable negotiations before escalating to tactical force.
They had to try talking first.
Exactly. And that mandate forced a complete paradigm shift. Agencies realized they could no longer just rely on snipers as plan A. They needed dedicated, specialized negotiation teams.
Right, the NYPD actually pioneered the first unit, and the FBI quickly followed suit.
But there was a major problem.
What was it?
Well, police officers knew how to breach doors, not how to conduct high-stakes psychological interventions. They were stepping into totally uncharted territory. So they looked to the only people who were formally studying the subject at the time. Academia.
Which makes total sense, right? Like, if you need to learn how to bargain for a life, go to the people who study bargaining for a living. And right at this time, in the early 1980s, the definitive text on negotiation theory dropped. It was a book called Getting to Yes, written by Roger Fisher and William Ury from the Harvard Negotiation Project.
Oh, Getting to Yes was a massive intellectual achievement. It completely revolutionized corporate bargaining.
You really did.
It attempted to systematize human conflict, turning it into this clean process of joint problem solving to reach mutually beneficial agreements.
The classic win-win scenario. So the source material outlines the four main tenets of the Getting to Yes method, which the FBI eagerly adopted at the time.
Let's hear them.
Okay, 1, separate the person and their emotions from the problem. 2, don't get wrapped up in their position, which is what they are demanding,
Sure.
but focus on their interests, which is the underlying reason why they are demanding it.
Makes sense.
3, work cooperatively to generate win-win options. And 4, establish mutually agreed upon objective standards to evaluate those solutions.
The architecture of that approach is honestly a brilliant synthesis of economic game theory and legal reasoning. But it relies on a very specific assumption. It assumes that the emotional, irrational parts of the human brain can be cleanly bypassed, or at least, compartmentalized, through a rational, joint problem-solving mindset.
And here's where I look at this through the lens of a modern professional.
Yeah.
Because on paper, that method sounds perfect for the business world.
It does.
Getting to yes treats human conflict like a clean math equation, where everyone just wants to balance the scales. Like you have two rational actors sitting across a boardroom table trying to maximize their value, find common ground, and sign a contract that makes both sides money.
Right.
So why did that rational value-maximizing approach fail so spectacularly for the FBI?
Because it assumes that both parties are operating under the same rational framework. It assumes that emotion is merely an obstacle to be set aside.
But it's not.
Exactly. The FBI embraced getting to yes wholeheartedly. Agents were literally memorizing these 4 tenets. But then came the crises of the early 1990s. Specifically, the siege at Ruby Ridge in 1992 and the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas in 1993.
Two of the most infamous, protracted, and really just disastrous standoffs in American history.
Yeah. And what the FBI realized during those sieges, in honestly the most painful way imaginable, is that you cannot devise a mutually beneficial, rational, win-win solution with an apocalyptic cult leader who believes he is the Messiah.
You literally cannot.
You cannot separate the person from the problem when the person's identity is the problem.
Right. You can't establish mutually agreed upon objective standards with someone who is taking their orders directly from God.
Precisely. In a hostage situation or a standoff with a highly volatile individual, the emotion isn't an obstacle to the negotiation. The emotion is the negotiation.
Wow.
The academic assumption of the rational actor completely disintegrated under the extreme pressure of life or death reality.
Our source material actually poses this brutal, soul-searching question that the FBI had to ask themselves after Waco. They asked, were we morons? Yeah. Why was everyone in the corporate world endorsing this best-selling business book as the greatest text ever written? Yet it was failing so catastrophically when dealing with actual kidnappers.
And the realization they came to was that humans in conflict are fundamentally not rational.
Which brings us to a crucial practical takeaway for the listener right now.
Huh?
We have to stop treating our clients, our bosses, our spouses, or our business partners like robots running a logic script.
Yes.
If you enter a high-stakes conversation relying purely on intellectual arguments, just assuming the other side will eventually bow to the superiority of your math or your logic, you will fail when the pressure is on.
Absolutely.
But if the old rules of pure logic are dead, and humans aren't perfectly rational actors trying to maximize value, how does the brain actually make decisions during a negotiation?
Well, to figure that out, the FBI had to look away from traditional economics and turn toward this burgeoning field of behavioral economics.
Okay, tell me about that.
Enter the groundbreaking research of psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. Kahneman eventually won a Nobel Prize for this work.
A Nobel Prize. So this
Yeah.
is heavy stuff.
Very. They basically dismantled the prevailing economic theories by proving, with exhaustive empirical data, that human beings are highly irrational decision makers.
So they discovered that our brains suffer from these deeply ingrained, unconscious processes called cognitive biases.
Yeah.
And these biases literally distort how we perceive value, risk, and reality itself.
That's exactly it. And while there are over 150 identified cognitive biases out there, the source text focuses on a few critical ones that specifically dictate negotiation dynamics.
Like what?
The first is the framing effect. Tversky and Kahneman demonstrated that people respond entirely differently to the exact same choice depending solely on how it is framed.
Give me an example.
So for instance, people place a massively higher psychological value on moving from a 90% probability of success to 100% certainty than they do moving from a 45% probability to a 55% probability.
Even though mathematically it's just a 10% jump in both scenarios.
Exactly. The absolute certainty of 100% alters our neurological perception of the value.
Right. It's the same reason a product labeled 100% fat-free sells significantly better than a product labeled 0% fat.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
It is the exact same objective reality, but the frame completely dictates the emotional response.
Building on that is prospect theory, which outlines how people manage risk. It basically explains why we tend to take unwarranted or even reckless risks when we are faced with uncertain losses.
But the most famous bias from their work, and arguably the most impactful for a negotiator, is loss aversion, right?
Oh, loss aversion is huge.
Yeah.
Loss aversion shows that people are statistically far more likely to take action to avert a loss than they are to achieve an equal gain.
So the psychological pain of losing $100 is far more intense than the joy of finding $100.
Exactly. So if you want to motivate someone in a negotiation, pointing out what they stand to lose if the deal falls through is infinitely more powerful than pointing out what they stand to gain.
That is such a huge shift in how we usually pitch things.
It is. And to understand why our brains operate this way, we have to look at Kahneman's masterwork, the book Thinking, Fast and Slow.
Right.
Because this is where the biological reality of negotiation really snaps into focus. Kahneman categorizes human thought into two distinct systems.
System 1 and System 2.
Exactly. System 1 is our animal mind. It operates automatically. It is incredibly fast. It is instinctive, and it is entirely emotional.
Okay, and System 2.
System 2 is our slow, deliberative, logical mind. It requires actual conscious effort to engage.
So the crucial insight here, the specific insight that completely dismantled that getting to yes rational actor model, is that System 1 doesn't just run quietly in the background. System 1 actually guides and steers System 2.
Yes. Our beliefs, our initial impressions, our gut reactions, they all originate in System 1. System 2 then just takes those emotional inputs and rationalizes them.
I find the best way to visualize this mechanism is with an analogy. I like to think of it like an elephant and a rider.
I love this analogy.
Right, so System 2, our logical brain, is the rider sitting on top of the animal. The rider thinks they're in control, they hold the reins, they have a map in their hands, they know exactly where they want to go.
Right.
But System 1, the emotional animal brain, is a 10,000-pound elephant. If the elephant gets spooked by a mouse on the path, or it sees a peanut it desperately wants, the rider is completely helpless.
Powerless.
The elephant goes exactly where the elephant wants to go, and the rider's only job is to furiously consult the map and try to justify why they are suddenly running into the bushes.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the sequence of human decision-making. We react emotionally, the elephant moves, to a suggestion or a threat or even just a tone of voice.
Yeah.
Then our logical brain, the rider, scrambles to construct a rational, coherent explanation for that gut feeling. The emotion dictates the logic.
Okay, let me challenge this with a real-world corporate scenario because I think a lot of professionals struggle to accept this.
Lay it on me.
Let's say we are sitting in a boardroom. A vendor is pitching a new enterprise software system to a CEO.
Okay.
The vendor pulls up a massive Excel spreadsheet. It's like 50 tabs deep, showing the precise return on investment, or ROI, essentially detailing exactly how much money the software will save the company over 5 years, alongside meticulously calculated efficiency metrics.
Very standard pitch.
Right. So are you telling me that when the CEO looks at all that undeniable math and says, yes, let's buy it, they are just using their System 2 rider to justify an emotional decision their System 1 elephant already made?
Yes, I am absolutely telling you that.
Really?
Yes. The math is rarely the true decision maker. The CEO might have felt a subtle sense of security from the vendor's confident tone of voice, or perhaps the CEO harbors this hidden underlying fear about falling behind industry competitors, and this software alleviates that anxiety.
Wow.
The spreadsheet, the ROI, the logic is simply the socially acceptable justification that the writer uses to explain the emotional choice the elephant has already made.
That makes total sense when you put it like that.
As the source text beautifully puts it, negotiating purely with System 2 without reading the System 1 emotions is like trying to make an omelet without knowing how to crack an egg.
That is a massive paradigm shift for anyone in business. It means that when a client or a partner says no to your logical argument, giving them more logic isn't going to fix the problem.
No, it won't.
You are just yelling at the rider while the elephant is already walking in the opposite direction.
Exactly. If you want to change someone's rational response, you must first reframe their emotional starting point. You have to speak to the elephant.
So the practical takeaway for you, the listener, is this. Do not pitch your brilliant logic until you have satisfied the other person's emotional state.
Never.
If you are going to your boss to ask for a raise, don't start by sliding a spreadsheet of your accomplishments across the desk. Start by addressing their emotional environment.
Right. Maybe they are stressed about quarterly budgets. Maybe they are anxious about a big project.
You have to satisfy the elephant's concerns first, calm it down, and only then can you hand the map to the rider.
Which leads directly to how the FBI operationalized this psychology. Because once they accepted that the emotional elephant is in the driver's seat, they realized their agents didn't need to be economists or mathematicians. They needed to act more like therapists.
And they called this new operational methodology tactical empathy.
It is fascinating to consider how jarring this transition must have been for hardened FBI agents, SWAT team members, and seasoned detectives.
Oh, I bet.
In 1994, shortly after the Waco disaster, the FBI forms the Critical Incident Response Group. They gathered a room full of experienced negotiators and asked them a simple question.
What do they ask?
They said, how many of you have dealt with a classic bargaining situation where rational problem solving was the best technique?
And?
Not a single hand went up.
Wow.
But when asked how many had negotiated in an intense, highly uncertain environment where the hostage taker was in an emotional crisis with no clear demands, every single hand went up.
So the FBI realized that clinical psychotherapy techniques worked infinitely better than mathematical game theory.
Yes. They started experimenting with counseling skills, because whether you are dealing with a bank robber or a CEO, it all boils down to a universally applicable premise. People desperately want to be understood and accepted.
Listening basically became the cheapest yet most effective concession a negotiator could make.
Decades of psychotherapy research show that when individuals truly feel listened to, a physiological shift occurs.
What kind of shift?
Well, they tend to listen to themselves more carefully. They begin to openly evaluate their own thoughts and demands. They become less defensive, less oppositional.
They calm the elephant down?
Precisely. That is the core of tactical empathy. The source material defines it as listening as an active martial art.
I love that phrase.
It's great. It is balancing the subtle, observant behaviors of emotional intelligence with the assertive skills of influence, all to gain access to the mind of another person.
And Voss points out that this applies to everything in life, because life itself is a continuous negotiation.
It really is.
Every single interaction you have at work, at home, or at the grocery store fundamentally boils down to the expression of a simple animalistic urge. I want you to release the hostages. I want a 10% raise. I want you to go to sleep at 9 p.m. Conflict is simply an inevitable byproduct of human interaction. Negotiation is how we navigate that conflict without inflicting damage.
It is a complete reframe of negotiation. It ceases to be a battle of arguments and becomes this process of psychological discovery.
Let me play devil's advocate regarding the word empathy, though, because it carries a lot of baggage in the corporate world.
It definitely does.
Usually when we hear empathy, it sounds soft. It sounds like giving up your own needs to comfort someone else. If I'm trying to close a massive, highly competitive real estate deal, won't being overly empathetic just make me look weak? Won't it just lead me to compromise my position and lose money?
That is a very common misconception, and it is vital we distinguish between the two. Tactical empathy is not compassion. It is not sympathy. And it is certainly not agreement. You do not have to agree with a kidnapper's worldview to empathize with their immediate emotional state.
That's a huge distinction.
Right. Tactical empathy is a calculated tool for extraction and influence. You are recognizing their perspective and purposefully vocalizing that recognition so they feel safe enough to reveal critical information.
So it is a strategic maneuver, not an emotional concession.
Entirely. And regarding your point about compromise, this is where the FBI method radically departs from traditional business negotiation theory.
How so?
Hostage negotiators play a highly unique role. They must win. They do not have the luxury of compromise.
Right. The phrase split the difference is a staple in business, but for an FBI agent, it's impossible.
To illustrate why, imagine a bank robber is holding 4 hostages. You cannot use traditional business compromise. You cannot say, let's split the difference, give me 2 hostages, you keep 2, and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, splitting the difference in that scenario literally results in tragedy.
Compromise is often just a lazy mechanism to avoid the hard work and discomfort of real negotiation.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. We compromise because it is cognitively easy and it allows both sides to save face. But a successful hostage negotiator has to get everything they ask for, the safe release of all the hostages, without giving up anything of substance.
And they have to do it in a way that doesn't blow up the situation.
Exactly. They have to execute this in a way that leaves the adversary feeling like they have a great relationship.
The book calls it emotional intelligence on steroids. So the practical takeaway here is transformative. Stop looking at negotiation as a logical battle to be won. Start viewing it as a psychological discovery process.
Yes.
Use intentional tactical empathy to uncover the hidden fears and unmet needs driving the other person's demands. And absolutely refuse to settle for lazy compromises just to avoid the temporary discomfort of conflict.
Because the discomfort is where the actual deal is found. If you avoid the discomfort, you are leaving the most valuable information on the table.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, from the tarmac in Jacksonville to the behavioral economics of Daniel Kahneman.
It's been a journey.
It has. Let's synthesize all of this. If we pull all these key ideas together into one overarching insight, what is the core soul of this chapter?
Right.
For me, it's that we have to shatter the false edifice of rationality that we have built around ourselves.
Right.
We walk around wearing business suits, carrying spreadsheets, speaking in acronyms, pretending we are these hyper-logical, computational beings, but we aren't.
Strip away the spreadsheets, and we are still emotional, irrational animals driven by deep-seated unconscious fears and desires.
The smartest person in the room isn't the one with the tightest mathematical argument, the largest vocabulary, or the most aggressive posture. The smartest person in the room is the one who accepts our animal nature.
Beautifully said.
It's the person who uses active listening, tactical empathy, and calibrated questions to gently guide the underlying emotional currents of the conversation. The smartest person in the room is the one who knows how to talk to the elephant.
And when you master that ability to speak directly to the emotional core, you gain the illusion of control. And you can dismantle the arguments of even the most elite Harvard professors.
So here is the forward-looking hook for you. Now that we understand the old rules of logic are dead, and we know we need to utilize active listening and tactical empathy, how do we actually apply this in the wild?
The million-dollar question.
Exactly. How do we start physically extracting these hidden fears and desires in a normal conversation without sounding like a shrink? The answer lies in a seemingly simple, almost magical conversational trick called mirroring. And that is exactly what we are going to explore in our next deep dive.
I am really looking forward to unpacking the mechanics of mirroring. But before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought based on everything we've explored from the source material.
Let's hear it.
Think about the last time you lost an argument, or a major deal fell through, or you had a massive fight with your partner. You probably walked away blaming the other person for being stubborn, for not seeing the facts, or for being irrational.
Oh, definitely.
But ask yourself, did the deal die because the facts were genuinely wrong? Or did it die because you were desperately trying to reason with the writer while completely ignoring the terrified elephant?
Man, keep that question in mind the next time you feel the urge to argue with logic. Until next time, keep diving deep.
Picture this. It is the morning of September 30th, 1993, a really brisk autumn day in Brooklyn.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, I want you to really visualize this. The scene is the Chase Manhattan Bank at 7th Avenue and Carroll Street. Around 8:30 in the morning, two masked robbers just storm through the doors.
And that changes the energy in the room instantly.
Instantly. They immediately trigger the alarm, and the stakes go from 0 to 100 in literally a fraction of a second. There are only 3 people inside at the time, 2 female tellers, and a 60-year-old security guard who, by the way, isn't even armed.
Oh, wow. So they are completely defenseless.
Completely. And the robbers, they don't hesitate at all. They take a .357 Magnum, crack the security guard across the skull, drag him to the men's room, and lock him inside.
Which is just, I mean, it's the kind of sudden violence that completely shatters your sense of reality. The brain is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Any illusion of safety is just instantly vaporized.
Right, and it actually gets worse. One of the robbers turns to the second teller. He walks up to her, takes the barrel of the Magnum, and physically forces it inside her mouth.
Good Lord.
He pulls the trigger, and there's just this terrifying, empty click.
It is playing with her life.
Exactly. He looks at her and says, "Next one is real. Now open the vault."
I mean, that is the ultimate life or death scenario. You really cannot manufacture a situation with higher stakes in human interaction. Every single heartbeat, every single word you say next carries lethal consequences.
It's a literal hostage situation. It feels like something straight out of a Hollywood thriller. But here's the pivot, and this is what I really want you, the listener, to think about today.
Yeah, where does this connect for us?
What if the ultimate tool used by the FBI to defuse this exact terrifying life or death hostage situation, what if that is the exact same tool you need to get your boss to drop an annoying project?
Right, or the exact same tool you need to win over a completely unreasonable, difficult client.
Exactly. It sounds absurd when you frame it that way.
It does sound absurd, but honestly, the mechanisms of human psychology don't change just because the context changes. The way the brain processes threat, safety, and trust. It remains remarkably consistent, whether you are facing a bank robber or an angry manager.
And that is the promise of today's deep dive. We are taking a look at a masterclass in human psychology found in Chapter 2 of our source material, which is titled Be a Mirror.
It's such a great chapter.
It really is. In this session, you are going to learn how to quickly establish rapport in basically any situation. You'll learn how to master active listening, how to adjust your physical tone of voice, and how to use the incredibly potent psychological art of repetition.
And this matters profoundly for anyone interested in business, entrepreneurship, or, just navigating everyday life. Because getting what you want never starts with a battle of logic.
Never.
If you try to start with logic, you are fighting an uphill battle against human nature. It always starts with making the other side feel completely understood and entirely safe.
So let's jump right into the foundational mindset you need to actually pull this off. The source material spends a lot of time warning about the danger of assumptions.
Yeah, assumptions are a killer.
They really are. Normally, when we prepare for a big meeting or like a salary negotiation or even a tough conversation with a partner, we make this mental list of assumptions.
We assume we know what the other person wants.
Right. We assume we know what their objections will be, and then we build our entire strategy around those assumptions. The text argues this is a massive trap.
It's a trap because assumptions act as blinders. When we walk into a room with a rigid set of expectations, we fall victim to confirmation bias.
We only hear what we want to hear.
Exactly. Our brains are incredibly efficient machines, which is honestly just another way of saying they are lazy. If we believe the client only cares about price, we will only hear the comments they make about budget.
And we completely miss the subtle hints they drop about needing better customer support or faster delivery times.
100%. We filter out reality to protect our assumption.
The phrase that really stuck out to me in the text was this distinction between good and great negotiators. Good negotiators go into a situation preparing for possible surprises. But great negotiators use their skills to actively reveal the surprises they are certain exist.
Yes, you aren't just bracing for impact. You are hunting for the unknown.
But exactly how do we make that shift, though? I mean, it's easy to say don't make assumptions, but it is human nature to try and predict the future, right?
It is, but the shift happens when you change your vocabulary. You have to stop treating your preconceived notions as facts, and you start treating them as hypotheses.
Hypotheses, like in science.
Exactly. A hypothesis is just an educated guess waiting to be rigorously tested. If you hold multiple, even conflicting hypotheses in your mind simultaneously, you remain incredibly present.
Because you're looking for evidence.
Right. You start using every new piece of information, every hesitation in their voice, every slightly awkward pause to winnow down the false hypotheses until you uncover the true one. You enter this state of discovery.
Which is incredibly hard to do because of what the text calls the schizophrenic conversation.
Oh, this concept is brilliant.
It blew my mind. The idea is that most people view negotiation, or really any difficult conversation, as a battle of arguments. Because of that, a standard conversation between two people isn't actually two voices.
It's four voices talking all at once.
Yes, you have person A speaking, but while person A is speaking, person B isn't listening to them. Person B is listening to their own internal voice, obsessively preparing their counterargument.
And the same goes for person A when person B finally talks.
Right. Everyone is just listening to the voice in their own head. No one is actually processing the information being shared across the table.
The author describes it as trying to treat two schizophrenics with just one pill. It's a remarkably noisy environment inside our heads.
It really is.
The voices in your head are overwhelming you, and the voices in their head are overwhelming them. When you are dedicating all your cognitive horsepower to formulating your next brilliant point, you are functionally deaf.
You miss the nuance. You miss the hidden leverage.
You miss everything.
It's like a terrible first date where both people are just waiting for their turn to speak. You know those dates?
Oh, painfully well.
Right, where you mention you love hiking, and instead of asking what trails you enjoy, the other person immediately launches into a 10-minute monologue about their trip to Machu Picchu.
Yeah. They weren't listening to connect with you. They were listening to find a jumping-off point for their own ego.
Exactly. And the reason that bad date feels so exhausting is because there is no mutual safety being created.
No, none at all. And in high-stakes negotiations, whether it is a million-dollar business deal or an armed standoff, that kind of self-absorption is fatal. The counterpart can sense that you aren't really with them.
So how do we actually shut off our own internal monologue, especially when the stakes are high, your heart is pounding, and you know you need to secure this deal or win this argument?
Right, because telling yourself don't think usually just makes you think harder.
Exactly, like don't think of a pink elephant.
You don't try to suppress your internal voice by telling yourself to be quiet. That never works. Instead, you use an active replacement. You make your sole, all-encompassing focus the other person.
So you just redirect all that energy.
Yes, you turn 100% of your cognitive bandwidth toward intense, active listening.
By obsessing over their words and their delivery, I literally just don't have the mental RAM left to worry about my own counterargument.
That is the mechanical reality of it, yeah. You quiet your own internal voice because your brain is fully occupied processing their reality. But the secondary effect is even more powerful.
What's the secondary effect?
Well, when a person feels truly deeply listened to, a physiological shift happens in their body. Their defense mechanisms lower. They feel safe.
Okay.
And when they feel safe, the defensive, argumentative voice in their own head begins to quiet down. By giving them your undivided attention, you are actively calming their internal monologue too.
That's just so cool. Okay, so we've managed to quiet our internal monologue. We're actively listening. But how do we actually signal that to the other person?
Right, because if we just sit there wide-eyed and completely mute, staring at them, it's going to be incredibly unsettling.
Super creepy. We have to use our voice at some point. Which brings up a huge trap. Most rookies fall into the speed of the conversation.
Rushing is toxic to rapport. It really is.
Why is that?
When you are in a hurry, it signals to the other party that their words don't matter. It communicates that you are just trying to drag them to your predetermined finish line. If you speed up, you trigger their threat response.
So to slow things down and take control of the emotional environment, the text dives into a concept it calls involuntary neurological telepathy.
That's quite a phrase.
It is. When I first read that, I immediately thought of science fiction. Telepathy sounds like magic, not a negotiation tactic.
The terminology is definitely provocative, but it is grounded in a hard biological reality.
How so?
Think about it from an evolutionary perspective.
Oh.
Long before early humans developed complex language and vocabulary, we had to determine whether the hominid walking toward us was a friend or a threat.
We had to do it instantly.
Instantly. So our brains evolved to process the emotions and intentions of others primarily through tone of voice. This happens in the limbic system, the ancient part of the brain, long before the prefrontal cortex processes the literal meaning of the words.
Wow, okay, so it's a primal thing.
Very primal. We are constantly, on an unconscious level, signaling to the world whether we are ready to play, collaborate, or fight.
It's fascinating how the text categorizes these vocal signals into 3 distinct tones. So most of us default to what they call the assertive voice when we want to be taken seriously.
Right, that direct, commanding, dominant tone.
Yeah, but the author basically says using this voice is the equivalent of slapping yourself in the face while you're trying to make progress.
It's a great analogy. The assertive voice communicates a very specific message. It says, I am in charge, and you will comply.
Which nobody likes hearing.
Exactly. The biological problem with this is psychological reactance. Humans have a natural, visceral reaction to having their autonomy threatened. When you use the assertive voice, you almost guarantee pushback.
Even if they don't say it to your face.
Right. That pushback might be overt, like they argue with you, or it might be covert, where they nod, say yes, and then purposefully sabotage the deal later. It is a relationship-destroying tone.
It's the voice of the manager who drops a stack of papers on your desk and says, I need this done by 5, and then just walks away.
Yep.
You might do the work because you need the paycheck, but you are going to resent them, and you certainly aren't going to give them your best effort.
Absolutely not.
Now, to counter that, the text introduces the positive or playful voice, which it says should actually be our default setting.
This is the voice of an easygoing, good-natured person. Your attitude is light and encouraging. The critical physical component here is that you must actually relax and smile while you are talking.
See, I have to push back a little here.
Go for it.
Because this sounds like a massive customer service cliche. The instruction is to smile even when you are talking on the phone. We have all heard that advice, but can people really hear a smile?
It's a fair question.
Is that an actual biological phenomenon or just corporate jargon designed to make call center workers sound chipper?
It sounds like a cliche, I know, but it is pure physics.
Physics.
Yeah. When you smile, the physical act of pulling your lips back and lifting your cheeks literally alters the shape of your vocal cords and the resonance cavity in your mouth and throat.
Oh, wow.
That physical alteration changes the acoustic properties of the sound waves leaving your mouth. The human brain is incredibly sensitive to these microacoustic changes.
So they literally hear the physical change in the sound wave.
Exactly. When your counterpart hears the acoustic signature of a smile, it triggers mirror neurons in their own brain. They unconsciously begin to feel more positive, safe, and collaborative.
That is wild. It is not just a nice idea, it's a physical acoustic reality manipulating their brain chemistry.
And it manipulates your brain chemistry as well. Smiling while you speak actually increases your own mental agility and problem-solving capability.
Yeah.
It primes both brains for collaboration instead of conflict.
Okay, so a smiling, playful voice is our default. But there is a third voice. The text calls it the late-night FM DJ voice.
My personal favorite.
And this is the one that really steals the show when things get chaotic.
It really does. The DJ voice is the voice of absolute calm and unshakable reason. It is characterized by a slower tempo, a slightly deeper pitch, and most importantly, a downward inflection at the end of your sentences.
That downward inflection is key, meaning instead of your pitch going up at the end of a sentence like you're asking a question.
Right, the upward tick.
Yeah, instead of that, your pitch drops down, finalizing the statement.
When you inflect upward, you introduce uncertainty. You invite a response and hand power over to the other person.
It sounds like you're asking for permission.
Exactly. But when you inflect downward, you signal that you have the situation completely covered. It conveys absolute control. But because the pace is slow and the tone is calm, it establishes authority without triggering the defensiveness that the assertive voice creates.
You are being authoritative without being dominant.
Precise.
The source material provides an incredible real-world example of this, going back to the bank robbery we talked about in the intro.
The Chris Watts situation.
Yes. So the FBI negotiator, Chris Voss, is on the phone with the lead bank robber, a guy named Chris Watts. Watts is rattled. The situation is incredibly tense. Watts gets on the phone and asks, "Hey, what happened to Joe?" referring to the previous FBI negotiator who had just been swapped out.
Right. He's testing the new guy.
Right. Now, Voss doesn't get aggressive. He doesn't get playful, because obviously a smiling voice in a hostage situation would be wildly inappropriate.
Yeah, that would be a disaster.
So he uses the DJ voice. He says, "Joe's gone. This is Chris. You're talking to me now." Downward inflection.
The mechanics of that delivery are essential. Voss wasn't negotiating who was in charge. He was stating a reality calmly and reasonably.
What if he had used the upward inflection?
If he had said, "Joe's gone, so you're talking to me now," with that questioning tone, he would have handed the psychological leverage back to the bank robber. He would have invited Watts to challenge him.
He would have seemed unsure.
Exactly. By using the DJ voice for the downward inflection, Voss asserted calm control and pulled Watts into his frame of reality, making Watts feel grounded rather than cornered.
The practical application for the listener here is just massive.
Yeah.
Before you enter a tense meeting, a salary negotiation, or a difficult conversation with a partner, you need to consciously adjust your physical state.
You really do.
If you want collaboration, force yourself to physically smile to alter your vocal resonance. If you need to establish calm control in a chaotic situation, physically drop the pitch of your voice, deliberately slow down your cadence, and use that downward inflection. You are literally hacking the neurological telepathy of the room.
You are using the physics of sound to reach into the other person's limbic system and flip an emotional switch from nervous to calm, or from hostile to collaborative.
Which brings us to a tactic that is arguably the most famous tool in the FBI arsenal, the Jedi mind trick of negotiation.
Mirroring.
Mirroring, or if we want to be highly scientific about it, isopraxism.
Isopraxism, yes. Mirroring is fascinating because it is so incredibly simple to execute, yet it feels uncannily powerful when you use it. In the context of FBI negotiation, a mirror does not refer to copying someone's body language or trying to mimic their accent.
Right, it's not the sales trick where you cross your legs when they cross their legs.
No. It is strictly a verbal tool here. It is simply the act of repeating the last three words, or the critical 1 to 3 words of what someone has just said.
Repeating the last 3 words, I have to be honest, when I first read that, it sounded incredibly annoying.
It sounds like it would be.
Like if I come to you and say, "I'm having a really stressful day," and you just stare at me and say, "Stressful day," I feel like I would be patronized. Wouldn't people just think you're acting like a parrot?
Looking at it through a purely logical lens, it seems like it shouldn't work. It sounds repetitive and weird.
Well,
But mirroring bypasses the logical, rational part of the brain entirely. To understand why it works, we have to look at the biology of isopraxism. This is a neurobehavior observed in humans and many other animals, where we copy each other to comfort each other. It stems from a profound evolutionary principle. Humans fear what is different and are drawn to what is similar.
Okay, that makes sense.
Difference implies danger. Similarity implies safety.
So it's an unconscious signal of tribal belonging.
That's exactly what it is. When you repeat their words back to them, you aren't just acknowledging that you heard them. You are sending a subconscious signal that says, trust me, you and I see the world the same way.
You are validating their reality using the exact vocabulary they chose to construct it.
Yes.
The text backs this up with a brilliant study by psychologist Richard Wiseman involving waiters. It perfectly illustrates the difference between standard active listening and actual mirroring.
Oh, I love this study.
So good. So Wiseman wanted to test the effectiveness of mirroring against positive reinforcement. He took 2 groups of waiters. The first group was instructed to use standard positive reinforcement when taking orders, using words we hear every day, like, great, no problem, sure, coming right up.
The standard stuff.
Yeah. But the second group was instructed to simply mirror their customers' orders back to them word for word. If a customer ordered a medium rare steak with a baked potato and a side salad, the waiter would just say, a medium rare steak, baked potato, and a side salad.
And the results were completely lopsided.
Totally. The group of waiters who simply mirrored the orders saw a 70% increase in their average tips compared to the positive reinforcement group.
70%.
70%, just for repeating words.
It's crazy. But when you look at the psychology behind those results, it makes perfect sense. Great and no problem are your words. They're the waiter giving their own stamp of approval to the customer's choice.
Yeah.
It subtly implies that the waiter is in the position to judge the order. But mirroring uses the customer's words. It makes them feel truly heard and validated on a subconscious level, which translates into a feeling of deep satisfaction and ultimately a larger tip.
We see this exact dynamic play out in a much higher stakes environment during the Brooklyn bank robbery. The FBI uses mirroring to extract critical, life-saving information without ever asking a single direct question.
This is a great example.
Let's go back to Chris Voss on the phone with the bank robber, Chris Watts. The FBI is trying to figure out if the robbers have accomplices waiting outside in a getaway vehicle. Voss says to Watts, the other vehicle's not out there because you guys chased my driver away.
Now consider the alternatives here. Voss could have asked a direct, logical question like, who is your driver, where did he go?
Which is what most of us would do. Exactly. But direct questions, especially in a high-stress environment, often trigger defensiveness. They feel like an interrogation. Instead, Voss uses a mirror. He repeats the critical words the robber had used earlier, but he adds an upward inquisitive inflection. He says, we chased your driver away. And Watts just starts vomiting information.
he does.
He responds, well, when he's seen the police, he cut. Because Voss mirrored him, Watts felt this unconscious urge to elaborate. He felt the need to fill the silence and explain himself to someone who seemingly understood his situation.
Exactly. Voss gathered vital intelligence about an unknown accomplice without ever putting the robber on the defensive.
It's a flawless execution of the technique. However, the text is also very transparent about a critical mistake Voss made right after this success.
Yeah, he got a little overconfident.
It serves as a perfect teaching moment for how fragile a mirror can be if you don't respect the mechanics of it. So Voss had figured out that the van parked outside the bank was registered to a Chris Watts. He wanted to confirm the identity of the man on the phone. So, riding high on the success of the mirror, he asks a direct question. He says, are you Chris Watts?
And the robber instantly shuts down. He says, no.
Just no.
Voss realized immediately that he had made a boneheaded move. In negotiation terminology, he stepped on his mirror.
Stepped on his mirror, meaning he didn't give the tactic the space it needed to breathe.
Right. For a mirror to be effective, it requires silence. It is a two-part technique. The repetition of words, followed immediately by stillness.
You have to bite your tongue.
You really do. When you mirror someone, their brain needs a few seconds to process the reflection, experience the feeling of similarity, and formulate their elaboration. By immediately following his successful mirror with the direct, closed-ended, identity-threatening question, are you Chris Watts? Voss broke the spell.
He totally shattered the feeling of safety.
He did. He forced the counterpart's brain back into a defensive, rational, yes or no state of mind.
The practical takeaway here is a game changer for anyone listening. When you need to gather information from a difficult client, or when your partner says something confusing or concerning, do not attack them with questions like, "What do you mean by that?" or "Why would you do that?"
Why is such a dangerous word?
It really is. Why makes people incredibly defensive. It sounds like an accusation. Instead, pick the 1 to 3 critical words they just said. Repeat them back with a curious upward inflection.
And then the hard part.
And then, and this is the hardest part, shut your mouth. Let the silence hang. Let the mirror work. They will inevitably reword their statement and expand on their thoughts, giving you the clarity you need without the conflict.
Which transitions us perfectly to one of the most practical applications of these tools in the modern workplace.
Oh, this story is so good.
We all face situations where we need to disagree with someone, but we don't want to be disagreeable. We all deal with forceful, type A personalities who operate on a command and control basis.
People who don't want collaboration, they just want compliance.
Exactly. So how do you handle an unreasonable demand from someone like that without sparking a war?
The text shares a story about the drive-by boss that I think every single person listening has experienced in some form. It is the ultimate test of emotional discipline.
It really is.
So there was a student in Voss's negotiation class who had this impulsive boss. He was notorious for these drive-bys, just popping into her cubicle unannounced with urgent, poorly thought-out assignments that created massive amounts of unnecessary busy work.
In this specific instance, the student and her team were finishing up a huge consulting project. The project generated thousands of digital documents. The boss pops his head into her cubicle and casually says, "Let's make 2 copies of all the paperwork."
Which is an insane request. Thousands of documents, printed twice, for no logical reason other than the boss is probably old school and scared of digital files.
Typical drive-by demand.
Now, if I am in that cubicle, my natural urge is to use logic. I would want to say, that's a massive waste of paper and time. We have secure digital backups on multiple servers. The client didn't ask for physical copies. It's going to take a week.
Sure, that's the logical response.
But if you do that, if you attack his demand with logic, what actually happens psychologically?
You trigger a massive ego threat. You are essentially telling the boss that his idea is stupid and that you know better. The boss will instantly become defensive.
He's not going to care about the servers.
Not at all. He won't process your logic about digital backups. He will interpret your response as laziness or insubordination. He will double down on his demand just to assert his authority. You have turned a logistical problem into a power struggle, and in a power struggle with your boss, you usually lose.
It just becomes verbal combat.
Exactly.
But the student doesn't do that. She uses a precise 5-step process from the FBI playbook to perform what I can only describe as verbal aikido. She uses the boss's own momentum against him.
The execution here is just a masterclass in emotional regulation. Let's look at the interaction. The boss demands 2 copies of all the paperwork. Step 1 for the student is to immediately access the late-night FM DJ voice.
Right. Before she even speaks, she drops her pitch and slows her cadence to establish calm control.
Exactly. Step 2 is starting her response with the phrase, "I'm sorry." This is a brilliant disarming tactic. It seeds warmth and humility into the interaction right out of the gate.
So she starts with a calm, downward inflecting, "I'm sorry." And then she moves to the mirror. That's step 3. She isolates the core of his unreasonable demand. She looks at him and says, with an inquisitive tone, "I'm sorry, 2 copies."
Now comes step 4, which we just discussed. Silence. She delivers the mirror and she waits. She doesn't explain why 2 copies are a bad idea. She just lets the reflection hang in the air.
And the boss has to deal with it.
Right. The boss is forced to respond to his own echoed words. He says, yes, 1 for us and 1 for the customer. He is clarifying his own logic, trying to justify the demand to himself as much as to her.
And she still doesn't argue. That's step 5, repeat. She just repeats the process. She uses another mirror, maintaining that calm, inquisitive DJ voice. She says, "I'm sorry, so you're saying that the client is asking for a copy, and we need a copy for internal use." She is forcing him to hear the structural flaws of his own demands.
And this is where the cognitive dissonance kicks in for the boss. He hears the demand reflected back, and he realizes it doesn't make sense.
You can almost hear the gears turning.
Yeah, he actually stops and thinks. He replies, "Actually, I'll check with the client. They haven't asked for anything, but I definitely want a copy. That's just how I do business." Look at what just happened there.
He backed down 50%.
He has already backed down 50% from his original demand, and she hasn't made a single logical argument against him.
It's incredible. So she agrees to make the internal copy, but then she asks a logistical question. Where would he like to store these thousands of printed pages, noting there is no space left in the file room?
And the boss gets perturbed. He's annoyed by the friction of actually having to think about the details.
Right, he waves his hand and says, "It's fine, you can store it anywhere," and boom! She hits him with one last mirror. She drops her voice, looks at him with calm concern, and says, "Anywhere!" And she lets the silence hang for at least 4 agonizing seconds.
That final mirror, combined with the prolonged silence, is the coup de grace. When a person's tone of voice is inconsistent with their words, like he says anywhere, but he's clearly agitated and knows anywhere isn't a real solution, a mirror forces them to confront that incongruence.
He has to face reality.
The boss takes a long, hard pause. He actually has to visualize the logistics of storing thousands of printed boxes in his own office.
And then he completely caves. He looks at her and says, "As a matter of fact, you can put them in my office. I'll get the new assistant to print it for me after the project is done. For now, just create 2 digital backups."
He literally negotiated with himself.
He really did. He ended up suggesting the exact logical solution she wanted in the first place, completely saving her a week of pointless busy work.
This is the essence of confrontation without confrontation. It requires immense emotional discipline to suppress your natural desire to argue logic and prove that you are right.
So hard to do.
It is, but by using the DJ voice, a mirror, and silence, you guide the other person into a state where they are evaluating their own demands. You create an environment that allows them to change their mind while still feeling like they are the one in charge.
Which is huge for their ego.
Massive. They don't lose face, their ego isn't bruised, and you get exactly what you want.
When you look at the bigger picture, all of these techniques, treating assumptions as hypotheses, quieting the schizophrenic conversation, utilizing the smiling voice and the DJ voice, and mastering the art of the mirror, they all serve one singular overarching purpose.
To build safety.
Yes, they are tools designed to extract information and build massive rapport by making the other side feel profoundly safe.
Exactly. When we think of master negotiators, popular culture usually gives us the image of hard-charging, aggressive Wall Street types.
Like the Wolf of Wall Street.
Right, pounding his chest, dominating the room, and forcing people to bend to his will. But the text offers a completely different and frankly surprising example of the ultimate master practitioner of these skills,
Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah Winfrey.
I loved this comparison.
It's so accurate. If you analyze Oprah's career, she did not become a billionaire media mogul because she argues with people or dominates them with logic. She's a master negotiator because she utilizes every single tool we have discussed today to absolute perfection.
Think about the mechanics of her daily television show. She is sitting face-to-face with a guest she has often never met, in front of a live studio audience of hundreds, with millions more watching at home.
A pressure cooker.
Huge pressure. Her task is to persuade that person, often against their own public relations interests, to reveal their deepest, darkest secrets, their traumas, and their failures on national television. You cannot bully someone into doing that.
You really can't. She achieves it by creating an impenetrable aura of safety. If you watch her interviews closely, she uses a conscious, warm smile to ease tension and alter her vocal resonance, making the guest feel welcomed.
The positive voice.
Yes. And when she needs to guide the conversation through difficult emotional territory, she shifts to downward inflections to establish a calm, comforting authority.
The DJ voice.
Exactly. And most importantly, she uses intense, active listening and precise mirroring to make the guest feel that she is entirely focused on their reality. She doesn't judge their statements. She reflects them.
And because the guest feels so intensely understood, their natural defense mechanisms just melt away. The voice in their head that says, "Be careful, don't say too much," it just goes quiet. They open up. They volunteer sensitive information. They swore to their publicists they would never share.
It's incredible to watch when you know the mechanics behind it.
It really is. That is the soul of this entire chapter. The true power in negotiation, in business, and honestly in life isn't about outsmarting the person across the table. It isn't about having the sharpest logical argument or the most dominant personality. It is about quieting your own ego, turning off your internal monologue, and becoming a flawless mirror for their reality.
Well said. When you become a mirror, you stop being an opponent and you become a partner in their thought process.
Yeah.
You don't have to drag them across the finish line. By aligning with their reality so completely, they naturally walk in your direction, believing it was their idea all along.
It's an incredibly empowering way to view communication. You start to realize that every difficult conversation is really just a puzzle, and active listening and mirroring are the pieces to solve it.
Yeah, but we do have to remember that making them feel safe and getting them talking is really only the first step of the journey.
Oh, absolutely. Because once they feel safe enough to start talking, they're inevitably going to bring their negative emotions, their fears, their anxieties, and their toxic baggage to the table.
Which, ironically, is exactly what you want to happen.
Right.
You want those hidden fears exposed. But you have to know precisely how to handle that emotional toxicity when it surfaces so it doesn't derail the negotiation.
And that is exactly what we're going to tackle next time. Now that you know how to build rapport and get them talking, how do you handle the negative emotions they bring to the table? In our next deep dive, we'll explore the art of tactical empathy and how labeling their pain can actually become your greatest strategic advantage.
It's going to be a good one.
But until then, the next time you face a tense conversation, I want you to remember that empty click of the Magnum in the Brooklyn Bank. Remember that the tool that ultimately saved the day wasn't a louder argument, a bigger weapon, or a flawless presentation of logic. It was a calm voice, a repeated phrase, and the absolute discipline to just listen. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. What if the biggest mistake you can make in a tense conversation is trying to keep a poker face?
Oh, yeah. We are always told to hide what we're feeling.
Exactly. What if the emotions you are desperately trying to hide or, ignore or push down to the bottom of your stomach are actually your most powerful tools?
It completely flips the script.
Right, because we are taught for our entire professional lives to leave our feelings at the door. I mean, if you think about any corporate training, any business school seminar, the underlying message is always exactly the same. Be rational. Be objective.
Keep a cool head.
Keep a cool head, exactly. There is this incredibly pervasive old school business mantra that tells us we need to separate the person from the problem.
Which sounds great on paper.
It sounds great, but today we are going to completely shatter that advice. Because, as we are about to discover as we dig into today's source material, the person's emotions are the problem.
You literally cannot separate them.
You can't. And attempting to do so is actually the quickest way to kill a deal, ruin a relationship, or just completely lose a negotiation.
Absolutely. So today we are doing a deep dive into the core mechanics of human connection, specifically focusing on Chapter 3 of Chris Voss's negotiation playbook.
Which has a very blunt title, right?
It really does. It's titled, Don't Feel Their Pain, Label It.
I love that.
And over the course of this deep dive, you are going to learn how to actively identify, vocalize, and ultimately influence the emotions of your counterpart using a psychological framework called tactical empathy.
Tactical empathy.
Yes. And this isn't just about making pleasant small talk,
Yeah.
This is a highly systematic approach to hacking the emotional dynamics of a room.
It's so necessary.
We're going to explore why mastering this specific tool is absolutely essential for anyone looking to build trust, navigate conflict, and close deals. Whether you are an entrepreneur trying to secure funding or a manager trying to calm down a frustrated team.
Or honestly, just someone trying to navigate a high-stakes conversation in your daily life.
Right. It applies everywhere.
Because I think most of us have this deeply ingrained, preconceived notion of what a high-stakes negotiation is actually supposed to look like.
Oh, for sure. What do you picture?
I picture, like, two people in expensive suits, sitting across a massive mahogany table, sliding pieces of paper back and forth.
With those icy, completely unreadable expressions.
Exactly. The whole interaction is framed as a battle of pure logic. It is all about who has the better argument, who has the more compelling data, who possesses the ultimate leverage.
The person with the most airtight spreadsheet wins.
That's the assumption. But the sources we are looking at today argue that this traditional academic view of negotiation is not just slightly off, it is fundamentally flawed the very moment it collides with the messy reality of human interaction.
Yeah, because if you trace the history of negotiation theory, especially the foundational models that came out of top-tier business and law schools in the late 70s and 80s, the entire premise was built on this concept of the rational actor.
Right, the idea that we're all perfectly logical robots.
Exactly. The prevailing academic wisdom, which they often called principled negotiation, was that humans are, at their core, rational beings who will act in their own best economic interest if you just give them the right information.
Which anyone who has ever been in an argument knows is just not true.
It's laughably false.
Yeah.
But back then, the emotional brain was viewed as this unpredictable, primitive beast that simply needed to be managed, or ideally, ignored entirely.
Just push it down.
Right. The strategy was to use joint problem solving and cold, hard logic to overcome that beast. The mantra was literally, separate the people from the problem.
Which again sounds nice.
But if you pause and think about how human beings actually behave in a crisis, or honestly, even just under moderate stress, that premise completely falls apart.
It totally does.
How can you possibly separate people from the problem when their deeply held emotions, their fears, their insecurities, their anger, are the very things generating the problem in the first place?
It reminds me of when your computer freezes.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
You know what I mean. Your instinct is to just keep clicking the mouse harder and faster, thinking that brute force is going to force the program to open.
Just aggressively clicking.
Yes. You keep feeding it inputs, but all you are doing is overloading the RAM and making the freeze worse.
You're just backing up the system.
Exactly. You have to open the task manager, identify what background process is eating up all the memory, and address that first before you can get back to your work.
That task manager analogy is spot on.
Because if someone is screaming at you across a table, or if they are terrified of losing their job because of a corporate restructuring, you cannot just hand them a spreadsheet like your rational inputs and expect them to suddenly become a robot.
The RAM is completely overwhelmed by panic.
Completely overwhelmed.
And once a human being gets upset, rational thinking literally goes right out the window. Their cognitive resources are hijacked by the emotional centers of the brain.
They couldn't be logical even if they wanted to.
Right. And that is exactly why the most effective negotiators in the world, people who are dealing with actual life and death situations on a daily basis, they do not deny, ignore, or try to logic away emotions.
They lean into them.
They make emotions the entire focal point of the interaction. They identify them, they influence them, and they do this using tactical empathy.
Okay, so let's unpack that.
Yeah, we need to be incredibly precise about how we define this term because empathy carries a lot of cultural baggage.
It sounds a bit touchy-feely.
It does. But tactical empathy is not sympathy. It is not feeling sorry for the other person.
Right.
It is not about agreeing with their values, their morals, or their worldview. And it's certainly not about giving them a hug or validating their poor choices.
So wait, if it is not about being nice or agreeing with them, what does it actually look like in practice? How is it tactical?
It is the deliberate, calculated ability to recognize their perspective, vocalize that recognition, and actively listen for what is driving their feelings in that exact moment.
And the goal is...
The ultimate goal is to increase your influence over them. It is bringing your full, undivided attention to the emotional obstacles in the room so you can clear them out of the way.
Make the road clear.
Exactly. And this is not just pop psychology advice. There is incredibly robust hard science backing this up.
I love the science part of this.
It's fascinating. For instance, our sources point to this fMRI study conducted at Princeton University that explored a phenomenon called neural resonance.
Neural resonance.
Right. Researchers wanted to see what actually happens in the brain when two people are communicating. And they found that when people communicate poorly, like when they are talking past each other or one person is just waiting for their turn to speak, their brains are doing completely different things.
The scans just look messy.
Right, there's no correlation. But when they communicate well, when someone is truly paying attention and practicing deep, active listening, the neural activity of the listener begins to mirror the neural activity of the speaker.
Wait, literally mirror?
Literally. Their brain waves actually align. In the most successful interactions, the listeners were so neurologically in sync with the speakers that they could actually anticipate what the speaker was going to say before the words even left their mouth.
That is wild. It is like they are hacking into the other person's biological frequency.
That's exactly what it is.
And the sources give us this incredible cinematic illustration of this kind of profound tactical empathy in action.
Oh, the Harlem standoff.
Yes. It does not take place in a corporate boardroom, and it does not involve a business deal. It takes place in a narrow hallway in Harlem in 1998, and the stakes could not possibly be higher.
It is the perfect crucible to test whether this theory actually holds up when lives are on the line.
So let me set the scene for you, because the details here are absolutely critical to understanding how counterintuitive this approach really is.
Paint the picture.
There are 3 heavily armed fugitives trapped inside an apartment on the 27th floor of a high-rise building.
27th floor. Nowhere to go.
Exactly. And these are dangerous men who had already been involved in a violent shootout with a rival gang just days earlier. The FBI SWAT team is stacked up in this incredibly tight, claustrophobic hallway right outside the apartment door.
Super tense.
Heavily armed snipers are positioned on the surrounding rooftops, aiming their rifles through the apartment windows. The tension in the air is just beyond description. I mean, one loud noise, one wrong move, and a massive firefight is going to break out.
It's a powder keg.
And to make matters worse, there's a massive logistical problem. The police have no telephone line into the apartment.
Oh, wow.
They cannot call the fugitives on a secure line to negotiate. So for 6 straight hours, the lead negotiator has to stand in that hallway and speak through the heavy wooden door of the apartment.
Just yelling through a door.
Right. But here's where it completely deviates from what you see in the movies. The negotiator does not bark orders. He does not use a megaphone to demand that they come out with their hands up.
He doesn't assert dominance.
No, he does not demand to know what they want. He does not try to offer a logical, rational argument about why they are surrounded and why surrender is their only mathematical option.
Because logic wouldn't work anyway.
Exactly. Instead, he uses this incredibly calm, slow, late-night FM DJ voice, and he mostly just listens. He aims his entire cognitive focus on understanding the intense, paralyzing fear radiating through that wooden door.
That FM DJ voice is such a specific intentional tool, too.
It is, but hold on, though. Are you saying I'm supposed to sit there and validate a guy who is actively shooting at the police?
Right, that's where people get stuck.
Or, to put it in a business context for the listener, if a client is screaming at my team and making completely irrational demands, doesn't treating them like a delicate therapy patient just reward their toxic behavior?
Doesn't it mean they win?
Yeah. Doesn't showing empathy just signal to them that they are right to act that way?
That is the single most common fear people have when they were introduced to this concept. And it brings up a crucial distinction regarding how tactical empathy actually functions. Okay, lay it on me.
The relationship between an emotionally intelligent negotiator and their counterpart is actually therapeutic, but not in the sense that you are coddling them.
Right.
Think of it like a clinical psychotherapist sitting with a deeply troubled patient on a couch. The therapist does not necessarily agree with the patient's destructive behaviors.
Of course not.
They certainly do not endorse the patient's skewed worldview or validate their terrible decisions. Instead, the therapist is actively poking, prodding, and turning responses back onto the patient.
To make them figure it out.
Exactly. The goal is to help the patient uncover and understand their own underlying drives, which ultimately changes their behavior from the inside out. You are doing the exact same thing in a negotiation.
So you're a mirror.
Yes. You are acting like a psychological mirror, reflecting their emotions back to them to subtly alter their behavior, but you are doing it without ever endorsing their actions.
That makes total sense. So in the Harlem standoff, the negotiator talking through that door was not agreeing that getting into gang shootouts was a valid life choice. Definitely not.
He was not telling them they were right to hold the SWAT team at bay. He was simply acknowledging the objective reality of their current emotional state. They were terrified of going to a brutal prison, and they were utterly terrified of getting killed by the snipers outside their window.
He's just naming the reality of the room.
Empathy, in this tactical sense, is not about being nice. It is about understanding the exact position the other person believes they are in, understanding why their actions make logical sense to them in their current state of panic, and discovering what emotional levers might actually move them.
Right. It's intelligence gathering.
So practically speaking, when you enter your next high-stakes conversation, whether you are asking your boss for a major raise, trying to close a massive vendor contract, or even just navigating a bitter dispute with a neighbor, you have to shift your entire paradigm.
You really do.
You need to open your senses, talk significantly less, and listen exponentially more. Treat the entire first half of the conversation like a fact-finding mission about the other person's emotional state, rather than a battle of rational arguments.
Stop pitching and start listening.
Stop focusing on your own logical points. Put your spreadsheet away and start tuning in to their emotional frequency.
That's beautifully said. Now, tactical empathy is the overarching strategy here, but a strategy is basically useless without a specific tool to implement it in the moment.
Right, what's the actual mechanism?
The primary, fundamental tool you use to execute tactical empathy is a technique called labeling.
Labeling. This sounds incredibly simple, almost dangerously simple.
It does sound simple, but its underlying mechanics are profoundly complex. building directly on the need to understand the other person's emotional state. Labeling is the act of validating someone's emotion by acknowledging it and giving it a distinct name out loud.
Just literally saying the word.
You are literally just attaching a word to what you are observing. But to understand why something so seemingly basic is so effective, we have to look past the psychology and go straight into the neuroscience.
Let's get into the brain stuff.
Our sources highlight a landmark brain imaging study conducted by UCLA psychology professor Matthew Lieberman. And this study is absolutely foundational to understanding why we negotiate this way.
What did he do?
Lieberman put subjects inside an fMRI machine and showed them photographs of human faces expressing strong, highly negative emotions. So faces showing intense anger, deep sorrow, absolute terror.
Okay, pretty intense imagery.
Very. And predictably, when the subjects looked at these photos, the amygdala, which is the primitive evolutionary part of the brain that acts as our fear and threat center, lit up like a Christmas tree.
Right, the amygdala is the body's internal alarm system. It is the part of the brain that evolved to keep us alive when we were hunting on the savannah.
It's pure survival mode.
It does not care about logic. It just pumps the body full of adrenaline and triggers the fight or flight response the second it perceives a threat. Whether that threat is a charging lion or, a passive-aggressive email from your boss.
Exactly. The amygdala processes emotional threats the exact same way it processes physical threats.
That explains so much about office culture.
Doesn't it? But here is where the Lieberman study gets fascinating. After the amygdala was fully activated by the photos, the researchers asked the subjects to do one incredibly simple task. Look at the angry face and label the emotion they were seeing.
Just name it.
Just give it a word. Say angry or scared. The very moment the subjects applied a rational word to the emotion they were observing, the activity in their brain visibly and immediately shifted on the fMRI monitor.
Wow.
The amygdala powered down, the alarm bell stopped ringing, and the neural activity moved to the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain that governs rational, analytical, and logical thinking.
The rational brain took over.
Exactly. The takeaway here is absolutely staggering. The mere act of applying rational words to a fear literally disrupts its raw biological intensity.
So by explicitly naming the fear, you are physically short-circuiting the other person's panic response.
You're hacking the system.
You aren't just calming them down figuratively. You are literally altering their brain chemistry in real time.
Yes. You are forcing their brain to transition from a state of emotional reactivity to a state of cognitive analysis. You are bathing their hidden fears in sunlight, which rapidly bleaches them of their power.
Bathing them in sunlight. I like that.
But to do this correctly, to actually trigger that shift in the prefrontal cortex without causing them to become defensive, there are very strict, almost martial art-like rules for execution.
You can't just yell words at them.
No, it is not just about randomly guessing how someone feels and blurting it out.
Right, so the sources outline 3 very specific, highly disciplined steps for executing a successful label.
Walk us through them.
Step 1. You have to detect the emotional state using what the sources refer to as the words, music, and dance.
Words, music, and dance.
This means you have to drastically expand your situational awareness. You are not just listening to their words, which honestly often mask how they really feel.
People lie with words all the time.
Constantly. You are listening to the tone, the cadence, and the pitch of their voice. That is the music. And you are hyper-focused on their body language, their posture, their micro-expressions. That is the dance.
The nonverbals.
Yeah. If their words say, I'm fine with this deal, but their arms are tightly crossed and their jaws clenched, the dance is telling you the truth.
Always trust the dance.
Step 2 is how you deliver the label. You have to phrase it completely neutrally. You always start with a very specific set of phrases, such as, it seems like, it sounds like, or it looks like.
That specific phrasing is huge.
And then comes step 3, which might be the hardest part of all for most ambitious professionals. You go completely silent.
Shut up.
You deliver the label, you shut your mouth, and you let the label do its neurochemical work.
Which feels like an eternity.
Yeah, wait, if I try this in a real high-pressure meeting, if my biggest client is visibly furious about a missed deadline, and I just look at them and say, it seems like you're angry, aren't they going to jump out of their chair and scream, don't you dare tell me how I feel? Of course I'm angry.
It feels risky, right?
It feels incredibly presumptuous, almost condescending to narrate someone else's emotional state back to them.
It absolutely feels that way the first time you try it, which is exactly why step 2, that precise phrasing, is so critical to the entire operation. This highlights the absolute genius of the specific words you're instructed to use.
Because you aren't saying you.
Notice that the designated phrases are, it seems like, or
Yeah.
it sounds like. You are explicitly avoiding phrases like, I'm hearing that you are angry, or I think you feel frustrated.
You are entirely removing the word I from the equation.
Yes. The moment you introduce the word I, you subtly shift the spotlight of the conversation onto yourself.
It makes it about you.
Exactly. It implicitly tells the other person that you are more interested in your own brilliant interpretation of the situation than you are in their actual lived feelings.
And that triggers defensiveness.
It instantly makes people put their guard up because it feels like an ego play.
Oh.
But when you simply say, it seems like, you are removing your ego entirely. You are presenting a completely neutral third-party observation.
Just stating a fact.
It is as if you and your counterpart are standing shoulder to shoulder, looking at a painting on the wall, and you are just objectively commenting on the colors you see.
That's a great visual.
And here's the most beautiful, foolproof part of this technique. If your label is totally wrong, they don't get angry.
Really?
Really. Because you didn't say, you are angry, you said, it seems like you are angry. They will simply correct your observation.
Oh, I see.
They will say, no, it doesn't seem like that at all. I'm not angry. I'm just incredibly stressed about my budget for Q3. And boom! Without asking a single probing question, they have just voluntarily handed you incredibly valuable intelligence about their internal pressures that you didn't have 30 seconds ago.
That is brilliant.
You win either way. If you are right, you calm their amygdala. If you are wrong, you gain crucial information.
So next time you sense that thick, uncomfortable tension in a room, you have to fight your natural instinct to ask, what's wrong?
Never ask what's wrong.
Because asking what's wrong demands that the other person do the incredibly hard cognitive work of analyzing, processing, and articulating their own complex emotional state.
Which they can't do.
Right. As we just learned from the Lieberman study, if their amygdala is firing, they literally do not have the brain power available to do that analysis.
They're locked out of the rational brain.
Instead, do the work for them by using a label. Say, it seems like you're hesitant about moving forward, and then embrace the awkward, heavy silence.
Lean into the awkwardness.
Let that silence hang in the air. The discomfort of the silence will invariably invite them to fill the void, and in doing so, they will reveal their true position to you.
That silence is where the actual negotiation happens.
That's the hardest part, though.
It is. We have this terrible, nervous habit in the business world of wanting to fill every quiet moment with our own brilliant arguments.
We just want to talk.
We throw out a perfectly good label, and then out of sheer anxiety, we immediately follow it up with a rationalization. We say, it seems like you are worried about the timeline, but don't worry, because our engineers are working overtime and we have a new project management system.
Oh, I've totally done
You
that.
just completely ruined the label. You stepped all over the moment of neural resonance. You didn't let their prefrontal cortex process the observation. You have to let the label land, endure the quiet, and let them fill the silence.
Okay, so we have the strict mechanics of labeling down, detect the emotion, phrase it neutrally without the word I, and stay silent. Now we need to look at how we strategically apply these labels to shape the entire dynamic of a relationship. Because this is where we move from just passively reacting to someone's bad mood to actively bulldozing the emotional obstacles out of the way.
And this requires us to understand a fundamental truth about human behavior. People's emotions generally exist on two distinct levels.
Like an iceberg.
Exactly like an iceberg. First, there's the presenting behavior. This is the part of the iceberg that is visible above the surface. It is what you can easily see and hear.
The yelling.
It is the yelling, the raised voice, the folded arms, the snide comment, or the passive-aggressive silence. But beneath that presenting behavior, hidden deep underwater, is the underlying feeling.
The actual root cause.
Right. This is the hidden, often vulnerable motivation that is actually driving the hostile behavior you are seeing. It is usually a primal fear, a deep sense of unfairness, a feeling of being disrespected, or a need to protect one's status.
And we usually just react to the top of the iceberg.
Amateur negotiators get incredibly distracted by the presenting behavior. They get offended by the yelling, and they start yelling back. They attack the iceberg above the water.
Which does nothing.
Master negotiators completely ignore the presenting behavior and use labels to target the underlying emotions. And the strategic rule of thumb here is remarkably simple, but wildly effective. Labeling negative emotions diffuses them, and labeling positive emotions reinforces them.
Let's really bring this to life because the sources provide 3 incredibly vivid real-world case studies that show exactly how this two-level dynamic plays out in completely different environments.
These examples are so good.
The first one is something almost everyone can relate to: the cranky grandfather.
We all have one.
Imagine the scenario. You are at a big family holiday dinner, Thanksgiving or Christmas. The table is set, everyone is trying to have a good time, but the grandfather is just being absolutely miserable.
Grumbling in the corner.
He is grumbling under his breath. He is complaining that the turkey is dry. He is being short and dismissive with the grandchildren. The presenting behavior is crankiness, irritability, and hostility.
Right, the stuff you can see.
And the traditional reflexive response from the family is to address that presenting behavior head on. Someone will eventually snap and argue with him, or tell him to cheer up and stop ruining the holiday, or everyone will just awkwardly ignore him and eat intense silence.
Which just makes him crankier.
Exactly. But if we put on our tactical empathy lenses, what is the underlying emotion driving that grumpiness? When you really look at the dynamics of an elderly relative who only sees his family once a year, the underlying emotion isn't anger about dry turkey.
It's rarely about the turkey.
It is a profound, sad sense of loneliness and irrelevance. He feels like the family has moved on without him, that they never see him, and that he no longer matters to the people he loves most.
It's actually heartbreaking.
It is. So instead of attacking the grumpy presenting behavior, you use a label to target the underlying sadness. You look right at him and say, "It seems like you feel we don't pay attention to you, and you only see us once a year, so why should you even make time for us?"
Notice how incredibly fearless that label is.
It's very direct.
Most people are terrified of saying something that blunt. You are going right at the most negative, uncomfortable elephant in the room.
Yep.
You are not sugarcoating it.
You are heading him off before his grumpiness can escalate into a full-blown argument. You acknowledge the deep sadness without any judgment whatsoever.
And then what happens?
And then, once you've labeled that negative emotion and watched his defensive posture soften, you immediately follow it up with a positive reinforcement. You say, "For us, this is a real treat. We want to value this time with you because we feel left out of your daily life."
Brilliant.
You have just neutralized the toxic negative energy and powerfully reinforced a positive connection. You validated his underlying need to feel important.
It's so elegant. The second case study moves us from the family dinner table directly into a high-stress corporate environment involving a ticket executive for the Washington Redskins named TJ.
Oh man, this story is intense.
TJ was dealing with a professional nightmare scenario. It was during a very tough economic downturn, and his specific job was to call up angry, financially stressed out fans who were delinquent on their payments for their season tickets.
I cannot imagine a more difficult cold call. You're dealing with diehard sports fans whose entire identity is tied up in this team, but the economy has tanked and they literally do not have the money to pay their bills.
Their pride is on the line.
Exactly. So when the phone rings and it is the team calling to collect, these fans are instantly flooded with guilt, deep shame about their financial situation, and intense defensiveness. That shame instantly manifests as screaming anger directed at whoever is on the other end of the line.
Right. The presenting behavior on these calls was sheer vitriol. And the standard corporate script that TJ was handed by his management was utterly terrible for the situation.
What did it say?
The script was basically, you signed a binding contract, you owe us this money, and we need you to pay right now or we will cancel your tickets.
That is just awful.
That kind of legalistic logic is the equivalent of throwing gasoline on an amygdala fire. It instantly triggers fight or flight.
So what did TJ do?
So TJ, recognizing this was a failing strategy, threw out the corporate script entirely and started using tactical empathy. Before he ever asked for a single dime, before he even mentioned the contract, he labeled the immense negative pressure the fans were under.
He went right for the elephant.
He started the calls by labeling the brutal economic times. He acknowledged the stress they were likely feeling just by picking up the phone.
Disarming them.
And then, crucially, he also labeled a powerful positive emotion. He explicitly acknowledged the team's massive debt of gratitude to these specific fans for their decades of unwavering loyalty through winning and losing seasons.
Wow. By taking this approach, he completely diffused the biggest negative dynamics in the conversation: their paralyzing shame and defensive anger over their delinquency.
Stripped it away.
He made them feel seen and respected, rather than judged and threatened. He turned a hostile collection call into a collaborative, solvable problem between two partners who loved the same football team.
And the result was staggering. He was able to peacefully set up structured payment plans with these previously furious fans, saving accounts that the corporate office had just written off as dead.
It is brilliant because he recognized that the real obstacle wasn't the contract, the obstacle was their pride.
Absolutely.
And the third example from the text might be my favorite of all because it shows how labeling doesn't just calm people down, it actively uncovers hidden roadblocks that you didn't even know were killing your deal.
The Girl Scout story.
Yes, it is a story about a student who is doing a major fundraising campaign for the Girl Scouts. She scores a meeting with a very wealthy, prominent donor, but the donor is acting completely immovable.
Just a wall of resistance.
The student is sitting in the donor's living room, passionately pitching project after project, funding for a new camp, funding for STEM programs, funding for uniforms, and the donor is just stone cold rejecting every single one.
Finding any excuse.
She is finding microscopic flaws in the budgets, shaking her head, crossing her arms. The presenting behavior is just being incredibly difficult, cynical, and finicky.
But there's an underlying feeling.
There always is. The student is getting increasingly desperate, but she realizes she's getting absolutely nowhere by throwing more logic and better brochures at the problem. So she stops pitching.
Smart.
She puts her materials down, looks directly at the donor, and deploys a label to target the underlying unspoken vibe in the room. She says, I'm sensing some hesitation with these projects.
And this is where we see the true power of step 3.
The silence.
The silence.
She goes completely silent. And the silence did its work. The donor, feeling the weight of that neutral observation, finally started talking. She started explaining her frustrations.
And the student just listened.
And she didn't argue. She just kept using more labels, gently digging deeper and deeper, until she unearthed the massive underlying emotional dynamic that was blocking the entire donation.
Which was so unexpected.
It turned out the wealthy donor wasn't rejecting the projects because the budgets were bad or the ideas were flawed. She was rejecting them because she harbored this deep, fiercely guarded, unfulfilled need to have her own cherished childhood memories of being a Girl Scout thoroughly understood and validated by the person sitting across from her.
She wanted to be seen.
She didn't want to just write a check to a stranger. She wanted to feel a shared kinship over what the organization meant to her decades ago.
That's a powerful need.
Once the student labeled that specific vulnerable emotion, once she validated the donor's personal history and emotional connection to the cause, the entire atmosphere shifted. The donor literally pulled out her checkbook, signed a blank check, handed it to the student, and said, "You understand me. I trust you'll find the right project for this money."
A blank check. Because she used a label.
Because she cleared the road of obstacles before trying to sell the destination. So, for the listener, when you make a mistake at work, or when you know you are walking into a conversation that is guaranteed to be tense and combative, your instinct will be to minimize the damage, make excuses, or stick purely to the logical facts.
Don't do that.
Do not do that. Go directly at the negative emotional dynamic. Acknowledge the other person's anger, disappointment, or suspicion fearlessly but deferentially.
Drag it out into the light.
Do not try to sweep their bad feelings under the rug. By labeling the negative emotion head-on, you prove that you are not afraid of their feelings, which instantly takes away the power of those feelings and creates a psychologically safe space for actual problem-solving to begin.
Which brings us to the ultimate, most proactive application of everything we have discussed so far.
Let's do it.
Up to this point, we have talked about reacting to emotions, observing the room, identifying underlying feelings, and defusing bombs that have already been planted.
Right.
But this final concept is about proactively controlling and shaping the emotional landscape before the other person even opens their mouth. It is about inoculating the conversation against negativity. This is executed through an advanced technique called the accusation audit.
The accusation audit, even just the name sounds intimidating. It sounds like you are picking a fight.
It was arguably the most terrifying, deeply uncomfortable, yet undeniably effective tool in the entire empathy arsenal. It goes against every instinct of self-preservation we have in a professional setting.
How does it work?
The core concept is this. Before a high-stakes negotiation begins, you sit down by yourself with a piece of paper. You exhaustively list every terrible, awful, unfair, highly critical thing your counterpart could possibly say or think about you, your company, or your proposal.
Every single one.
You list all their legitimate grievances, all their irrational fears, and all their negative assumptions. And then you voluntarily state those exact things out loud to them at the very beginning of the meeting before they have a chance to say them.
You literally steal their thunder. You take all their best ammunition and fire it at yourself.
You steal their thunder, but you do it coded in tactical empathy. You are acknowledging their reality before they have to fight you to prove it. The sources give a brilliant illustration of how this lowers anxiety from a high-pressure classroom exercise called 60 Seconds, or She Dies.
That sounds like a fun class.
The setup is intense. The instructor plays the role of a volatile, dangerous hostage taker, and a student is randomly selected to come to the front of the room and has exactly 1 minute to convince him to release a hostage.
Oh, wow.
It is a brutal, highly intimidating public role play, and the students are naturally terrified. They're sweating, looking down at their desks, praying they don't get picked.
Naturally.
So how does the instructor get these terrified students to volunteer? He doesn't use false positivity. He doesn't say, come on, guys, it'll be fun. It's a great learning experience. Don't be scared.
Which is what most teachers would say.
Right, but that would invalidate their very real fear. Instead, he performs an accusation audit. He stands at the front of the room and says, in a minute, I'm going to ask for a volunteer. And when I do, you are going to think this is a horrible, unfair experience. You are going to think I am a terrible instructor for putting you on the spot. You are going to be worried that you will freeze up, fail miserably, and look completely foolish in front of all your peers.
He just says all the quiet parts out loud.
He prefaces the horrible role play by labeling their exact worst-case scenario fears out loud in advance. And by letting those terrifying words hang in the air, he completely diffuses the anxiety in the room.
Because everyone is thinking it anyway.
Exactly. He validates their dread, which ironically makes the unreasonable task seem far less forbidding. By voicing the fear evaporates. He always gets more volunteers than he actually needs.
That is fascinating in a classroom setting, but let's look at how this translates into a hardcore, cutthroat business negotiation. Because the sources detail a case study involving a woman named Anna and her partner Mark.
The B2B example.
Yes. They are representing a massive corporate giant, and they are flying out to negotiate a highly contentious contract with a much smaller subcontractor company. Let's call them ABC.
Okay.
Now, ABC is coming into this meeting incredibly hostile. They have a laundry list of deeply held grievances. The original scope of the deal has changed, the timeline has shifted against their favor, and ABC firmly believes they are getting screwed over by the faceless corporate giant.
And they are ready to go to war.
The power dynamic is completely lopsided, and ABC is incredibly defensive.
This is a wildly common dynamic in B2B negotiations. The smaller vendor feels bullied, and they come into the room ready to fight tooth and nail for every inch, usually leading to a breakdown in communication.
Exactly. The tension is thick enough to cut with a knife. So how do Anna and Mark open this incredibly hostile meeting? They do not start by firing up a slick PowerPoint presentation showing how mathematically fair the new terms are. They do not start by defending their company's honor.
They do the audit.
Anna opens the meeting by performing a ruthless accusation audit. She looks the executives of the smaller company dead in the eye and says, "You may feel like we have treated you unfairly in this process. You're going to think we are a big, bad prime contractor trying to use our size to push you around. We fully acknowledge that you believe you were promised this work under different, more favorable terms, and that we are pulling the rug out from under you."
I want the listener to really pause and think about the sheer professional courage that takes.
It's massive.
To fly across the country, sit across a mahogany table from an aggrieved, angry vendor, and voluntarily say out loud, "You probably think we are the big bad prime contractor trying to screw you over."
Yeah.
Every corporate PR instinct screams that you should never admit to those negative optics.
But look at the staggering result. By laying the absolute worst, most toxic accusations bare on the table in the first 60 seconds, the smaller company was entirely disarmed.
They had nowhere to go.
They had spent weeks preparing their angry speeches about how they were being bullied, and Anna just validated all of it before they could even open their binders. The tension in the room just evaporated.
Amazing.
In fact, the smaller company felt so deeply understood and validated by Anna's audit that human psychology flipped on its head. They actually started defending Anna and her company.
That's crazy.
The smaller company's lead representative instinctively softened his posture and replied, we don't feel like you are mistreating us intentionally, and you guys aren't the big bad prime contractor. We know you have pressures from your clients, too.
They took the other side of the argument.
It is literal Jedi mind trick level stuff. She got the hostile vendor to defend her corporate reputation. And this doesn't just work in multi-million-dollar boardrooms, it works in chaotic, everyday situations too.
The airport example.
The sources mention this quick, highly relatable example of a guy named Ryan at a crowded airport. His flight gets heavily delayed due to weather, and chaos breaks out. Hundreds of customers are furious, and Wendy, the gate agent, is standing at the podium getting verbally abused by wave after wave of angry travelers.
The worst job in the world.
Truly. Ryan needs to get rebooked on a different flight, but he knows Wendy is emotionally exhausted and defensive. So he walks up to the podium, and before he asks for a single favor, he proactively audits the extreme negativity of her environment.
What does he say?
He doesn't just say, "Hi, can you help me?" He says, "It seems like these people were pretty upset, and it seems like you've been handling a really rough, unfair day pretty well."
Just acknowledging her reality.
He validated the barrage of abuse she had just taken. He proved he saw her reality, and because he made her feel seen and safe, she didn't just rebook him. She went out of her way to bump him up to Economy Plus.
Because he treated her like a human being.
Hold on, though. As incredibly effective as these stories sound, my brain is screaming at me that this is a terrible idea in practice.
Why?
Doesn't saying all this wildly negative stuff out loud just plant bad ideas in the other person's head? Like, if the executives at ABC weren't explicitly thinking that Anna was a big bad prime contractor, didn't she just hand them that weapon?
That's a fair point.
If you deny a negative or if you bring up a massive grievance, doesn't it just give those toxic thoughts more credence and validate their worst suspicions?
It is a completely logical fear, and it is the reason most people fail to utilize this tool. But human psychology, particularly when under stress, works in the exact opposite way of logical intuition.
Make it make sense.
To understand why the accusation audit doesn't plant bad ideas, but rather destroys them, the sources point to the communication strategy utilized by top-tier defense lawyers in high-profile criminal trials.
Oh, interesting.
In a courtroom setting, elite defense lawyers use a psychological technique known as taking the sting out. During their opening statement to the jury, long before the prosecution ever gets a chance to speak, a great defense lawyer will voluntarily and meticulously list all the absolute worst, most damning weaknesses of their own client's case.
They just list everything bad.
They will list every terrible, horrific thing the prosecution is going to accuse their client of doing.
Why on earth would they do that?
Because when you say the worst-case accusations out loud voluntarily, in a calm and objective tone, it actually strips the accusations of their shock value.
Oh, I see.
It makes the accusations sound exaggerated and slightly ridiculous. It completely robs the opponent of their primary weapon because you have already fallen on the sword.
You control the narrative.
Right. When you try to subtly deny a negative, when you preface a statement by saying, "I don't want to sound harsh, but," or "I'm not trying to be greedy," you actually give the negative credence.
Because everyone knows what comes after the bet.
The listener's brain immediately thinks, "Oh, they are definitely about to be harsh and greedy." But when you embrace the absolute worst negative and label it boldly, you probably think I'm being incredibly greedy right now. It triggers the counterpart's natural human empathy.
It makes them want to reassure you.
Exactly. It makes the accusation sound so extreme that their instinct is to comfort you and walk the accusation back. They will instinctively say, "Well, I wouldn't say you're being greedy. We just need to find a better price point."
That is so powerful. So before your next high-stakes meeting, performance review, or even a difficult conversation with your spouse about finances, you need to sit down in a quiet room with a pen and a piece of paper.
Do the work beforehand.
Write down the 3 absolute worst, most unfair things the other person is likely thinking about you, your motives, or the situation. Then, when you sit down for the conversation, force yourself to start the meeting by acknowledging those exact 3 things out loud using a neutral label.
Put it out there.
Say something like, "It probably seems like I am completely ignoring your department's needs. It will feel terrifying. Your self-preservation instincts will scream at you to stop talking.
Push through it.
But if you have the courage to do it, it will instantly disarm their defenses, build an immense amount of unspoken trust, and bring you both into a safe zone of empathy where a real, productive negotiation can finally begin."
And we pull all of these concepts together, from the neurobiology of the amygdala to the airport gate agent. At its core, this chapter is teaching us that deep, authentic human connection is the absolute, non-negotiable prerequisite to any lasting agreement.
You can't skip it.
You simply cannot skip the emotional step to get to the logical step. Trying to do so is like trying to build a house, starting with the roof. Empathy is not a soft, HR-mandated interpersonal skill. It is a highly tactical psychological martial art. By intensely observing the words, music, and dance. By neutrally labeling the underlying emotions rather than fighting the presenting behaviors, and by fearlessly auditing the worst accusations in the room, you aren't just making polite conversation.
No, you're engineering the outcome.
You are actively, systematically hacking the neural pathways of your counterpart. You are moving them from a physiological state of paralyzing fear and combative resistance into a state of openness, collaboration, and trust.
It fundamentally changes how you view conflict. Usually we want our business disputes to be like an X-ray clean binary objective. The bone is either broken or it is not broken. The numbers either add up or they don't.
But that's not humans.
But the reality is that human emotion doesn't show up on a spreadsheet. You cannot see a manager's deep-seated fear of failure, or a vendor's lingering sting of feeling disrespected, or a client's paralyzing anxiety about a tough economy just by looking at a profit and loss statement.
You have to look deeper.
But by mastering tactical empathy, you essentially become the emotional X-ray machine. You illuminate all the hidden, unspoken fears that are killing your deals, and in doing so, you finally have the power to heal the break.
Beautifully said.
So you now have the tools to clear the emotional boulders off the road. You know how to short-circuit the amygdala, neutralize the negatives, and get your counterpart feeling profoundly safe and understood.
But what comes next?
Exactly. What happens when they finally feel safe enough to actually start making demands? Join us on our next deep dive, where we'll explore a concept that will completely flip your understanding of agreement upside down. We'll explore why aiming for a yes might actually be the exact thing killing your deals, and how learning to aggressively court the word no is the true hidden secret to generating unstoppable momentum.